The reading is from Luke chapter 15. Now, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus shared this parable with his disciples. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father,
"Hey, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me now."
So the father divided his property between his 2 sons. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said,
"How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.'"
So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around his son and kissed him. And then his son said to him,
"Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son."
But the father said to his slaves,
"Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found."
and they began to celebrate. Now the elder son was in the field working, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. The slave replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he's got him back safe and sound." The elder son became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but the elder son answered his father,
"Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him."
Then the father said to him,
"Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found."
For the wisdom contained in these holy words, we give thanks.
Thank you, all of you, and thank you, instrumentalists, as well. Well, this has been another interesting and full week in our country, hasn't it? And given that perhaps during this past week, at some point you may have thought or said out loud the words, "I told you so." And that would be very understandable. That would be very human of us to be feeling that right now, those of us who are astounded at what is happening around us. But the thing is that "I told you so" doesn't move us closer to wholeness and shalom or comprehensive well-being. And yet we still have, many of us, a feeling of resentment and confusion inside. And so what are we to do with those very real feelings that we have? Well, once again, let us go to wise Jesus and see what we can learn from that. Now, today's scripture is the third parable in a set of 3 that specifically talks about the joy that can come from being lost and then being found again. Okay? The first parable that talks about this is the lost sheep. And the story there is that there is a shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one of those sheep, just one, wanders off. And so he leaves 99 of his sheep to just be there while he goes off to get this one who has wandered, because that is how important every one of the sheep is. And so when he finds the sheep, he comes back and he says to his fellow shepherds and to the neighbors, "Come rejoice with me." The second parable about being lost and found is the parable of the lost coin. And in this story, there is a woman who has lost a coin in her home, and she looks everywhere and can't find it. And she's frustrated, but she persists. And in her persistence, she finds that lost coin. And so she goes to her family and neighbors and says, "Come rejoice with me," because she's so happy about that. The third parable of the three is the one we heard today, the parable of the prodigal son. And it is much longer, first of all, but it is also nuanced and more complicated, definitely, than the other two. So one of the reasons that it's complicated and nuanced is that the thing that is lost is a human. The human that is lost then gives us a chance to feel a sense of connection and understanding with the story, and it's more emotional for us probably as well. Now, this human that is lost is the younger son in a family, and he does something that is quite irregular in first century Palestine. He goes to his father and asks for the inheritance early, before the father has even died. And this is disrespectful in that culture, and we really don't understand why the father in the story acquiesces and gives it to him. But to the ears of those who are in first century, this is completely disrespectful. And then the younger son pours salt in the wounds because he takes his inheritance, which is land, and he cashes it out. Land back in that time was extremely important to the identity and the honor of people, of families. And so for him to first take it early, but then to cash it out, wow, mind blown. So then what he does is he leaves town and he goes to a distant land, a Gentile land, which means he's automatically then not participating in Jewish tradition and Jewish laws. He is estranged from his family, which means that that sense of solidarity that was so important to that culture was broken. Then he takes that cash that he had and he makes really poor choices with what he does with it. He is reckless, he's loose and fast with it. He squanders all of the money until he has nothing. And so then he finds a job feeding pigs and eating pig slop. And right there, that is a sign of disobedience in the Jewish tradition because it was unclean. So this series of disrespectful and completely reckless and non-traditional things that he did makes the Father's welcoming, his compassion and grace, that much more astounding to first century ears and to our ears as well. Now, he finally repents. He says he comes to himself. And so he comes back to his father, and his father is incredibly welcoming. In fact, when he sees his repentant son coming way off in the distance, the father runs to the son, and he publicly welcomes him back, and then he kisses him. All three of these things are not becoming to men in first century Palestine. So the father risks the reputation of himself and his family in behaving this way. But then he goes a step farther and he said, "We will have a celebration. Let's celebrate." And he pulls out all the stops. He is truly welcoming his son back in fully to that family in every way. He says, "My son was lost, but now is found. My son was dead, but is now alive." There's a sense of joy, just kind of an inherent joy, I think, that comes when there is reconciliation and compassion and grace that is shared, no matter what the circumstances. Because reconciliation leads to wholeness, and wholeness leads to shalom, or comprehensive well-being, and that is life-giving, and it just feels good. It's like creating a bridge. Now, this could easily be the end of this parable, right? About forgiveness and grace in difficult circumstances, but the parable goes on, and it's almost like there's an entirely new storyline in the second part of this. And the storyline is this: it's about the burden of lingering resentment. In this story, we are offered two different possibilities of how we might deal with a situation where there is destructive, incomprehensible, painful, poor choice behavior, where somebody recognizes that they have done that and comes for forgiveness. One of the options that we have, of course, is how the father behaved. In the midst of his son's reckless, destructive behavior, his heart is full. I mean, it is full of love. It is filled with heart. He is open to receive everything that God is giving him to show grace and compassion. And I want to point out that this word compassion in this particular parable is actually the same Greek word for the compassion that the Samaritan last week felt when he saw the man lying along the road. And so those of you who are here for that story, it's the exact same word, the compassion here. So we have that option, to just fully go into it and be willing to have humility and welcome somebody back. And then we have the older son's reaction. He is filled with bitterness and resentment, and he can't get past it. He has followed every rule. He has done everything that he's supposed to do. He has lifted up all the cultural norms during this period where his brother has been off, squandering the money and ruining the family reputation. His father's forgiveness is kind of a final straw, because his father's forgiveness to him says that the rules have been turned on their head. And the older son's work and all that he gave has been turned also on its head. Everything that he thought he knew about how he was supposed to be has been turned upside down. And it's his brother that is getting the celebration. I have a feeling that over the next couple of weeks, months, and years, we are going to be faced with similar scenarios over and over again. Scenarios where rules have been turned upside down and things as we know them are not the same that they were. And that some people who were angry are getting rewarded. And we're finding ourselves on the other end of that. And in those situations, we might very well want to say over and over again, I told you so. I told you so. I told you so. But I told you so doesn't move us towards reconciliation or wholeness or shalom. And so faced with that, what do we do with our anger and our resentment? Well, we'll have choices that we have to make. And we'll have to decide what to do with how we're feeling about what's happening around us in the world. So I want to share with you a metaphor that I heard a couple of months ago about the circumstances that we're in and why we might be feeling the way we are. And I have found it incredibly helpful to me over the last 2 months. So I want to share it with you because it might help you as well. It's a metaphor that is very familiar to especially those of us who are older in this room. It is a seesaw that you might find on a playground, although I don't think they're putting seesaws like that on playgrounds anymore. So hear my metaphor. It is this, that in order to play on the seesaw that many of us remember from our childhood, there was a set of rules. And everybody, in order to play, had to follow those simple set of rules. And the rules were this, is that you had to get on at the same time. And then you had to be willing to allow each other the chance to go up and down. You had to be willing to go up when the other person went down, or to go down when the other person got up. And you had to work together in order to play on a seesaw. And if at any point the rules were not followed or the rules were changed, what would happen? One person would go flying down and slam against the ground. And it hurt. And it was startling. Somebody suffered. And in that case, off balance is lost. There's no centering that happens there anymore. And that's what's happened to us. That's what's happened to us, is that the rules that we thought we were all playing together suddenly have disappeared. And we have fallen hard, and we're suffering, and it hurts, and we don't understand. And more importantly, there is no sense of balance, there's no centering where it seems like we might be able to get back on. And so when you fall hard like that, you feel the resentment and the anger about the rules that have changed and somebody not playing that way anymore. Here's the most important thing. There are many other groups who have been feeling that way for a very long time. Some of them for hundreds of years in this country. Some of them for a much shorter time, just recently. But this metaphor helps me understand how we got to the place we're at right now. And so without this centering anymore, we have to ask ourselves, what do we do now? Where the rules aren't seeming to fit. And what I'd offer up to you is that what we do now is each one of us has to go deep inside and develop a sense of divine connection toward compassion and grace. To call upon the compassion and grace that each one of us is born with from God, Creator, universe, source, whatever word you use, that is free to us, accessible to us all the time. Each of us has to somehow connect with that so we have that inside of ourselves and have the ability then to find a new centering. And if each of us does that, then collectively we come together and the power of that centering starts to take hold. It's a new balance, it's a new centering. But if we come together like that, if each of us does our own work and we come together like that, perhaps the power of that can turn, I told you so, into I see a future. May it be so.